know, the attacks also brought to the surface this very long-standing tension within modern Jewish life of whether or not diaspora Jews should stay put or whether they should heed Prime Minister Netanyahu's call to come home, to make Aliyah to Israel. And we saw, certainly in the last few months, or really in the last year, many, many more French Jews moving to Israel. But there also are pleas from French Jews, no, actually, don't encourage us to leave, help us stay. How do you react to that, Rebecca?
Well, I guess my reaction is that who am I to decide what an entire group of thousands of French Jews should do? I think that it's a very individual decision, and I think that it's very easy for someone like Netanyahu to say, everybody come home, come home. I think that, frankly, it fuels him politically to have this, evil, ominous thing that is, the threat to French Jewry, just like it really helped Castro to have the embargo in place because it helped fuel Cuban nationalism. It's easy to look at that, but then you can't ignore the fact that French Jews, that's their home. Some of them probably consider themselves more French than Jewish, and France has a lot of benefits. It has healthcare, it has childcare, it has, access to the Loire Valley on a regular basis, which is a big plus for me. But so, who is Netanyahu or anybody to say what should happen to thousands of people?
That's a really good point, too, about Netanyahu's agenda. Let us not forget that he has an agenda, a very pointed one, and he's hardly subtle in putting it forward.
That's true, and while I have certainly disagreed with him on many an occasion, let me just push back on that a little bit. I mean, isn't this what we want? Don't we want the modern state of Israel to be a refuge? And shouldn't it be the place that people feel that even if they are going to live in a terrorizing situation, and certainly Israel has some neighbors that fit that description, it's also our home. It's also the home of the Jewish people.
Well, and I think that even though I've disagreed with Netanyahu on many occasions, there was something stirring about that speech for me. And I do think he overstepped. I don't think that it was the right moment to do it. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, it felt political and in some sense utilitarian, and exploitive. It was not the right moment. But what was moving about it was a reminder that the refuge does exist, that this idea of a home, and I mean, you use that word casually, that's a powerful word for those who aren't there, who were not born there necessarily. I mean, I was really struck by the fact that the victims all were buried there. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's just a reminder to those of us for whom we don't feel like a refuge is really imminent, necessary, God willing, that does exist, and that there is a sense of saying you always have a place here where you will be protected.
And let us not forget the reason the state of Israel exists, which is because refuge was needed.
Right. I think it's interesting to think of whether refuge is the driver around Israel. Like, is that the identity of the modern state of Israel in 2015? And I think that's a big question. In good moments, I don't know that we want to think of Israel. Israel has a lot more going for it than the refuge status. And I think also it shapes the Jewish mind to think of Israel in that way when there are so many other things happening in Israel, and the identity of the place is not only about being on the defensive. And Israel isn't exactly the safest place on the planet either, so I don't know in what way the sense of calm exists when one lives in Israel versus one lives in France. And I think the other question on the table is about home and whether diaspora Jewish life is viable, honored, and validated.